Hello, everyone. This is going to be my presentation on Gary Bettman, the Commissioner of the National Hockey League. To give a quick rundown, I'm going to do a quick introduction of who Gary Bettman is, and then also the NHL up until the arrival of Gary Bettman. From there, kind of dive into some actions that he demonstrated for transformational and strategic leadership, while also kind of diving into authoritative characteristics that he showed in some of those actions. So who is Gary Bettman? Gary Bettman is actually the only commissioner that has been in the NHL's history. Previous to that, there was high leadership individuals in terms of league presidents, but the title of commissioner was first hailed to Bettman as of 1993. His name nowadays is synonymous with the rise and growth and power of the National Hockey League. Before actually he got started with the NHL, Bettman graduated from Cornell University and New York University School of Law in 1990-74, where he then accepted a role with the NBA, initially within their marketing and legal department. Throughout his years there, he was there for about 15 years or so. He slowly rose through the ranks of the NBA and eventually became a senior vice president and member of the general council. From there, he began to look for other leadership opportunities in other sports. The NHL found him because partly to his leadership style, but also kind of how the league was progressing. So as of February 1st, 1993, Bettman has become the first and, like I said, only commissioner that the NHL has thus seen.
So I think it's important to talk about the NHL up until the arrival of Bettman. So the league itself actually goes back well over 100 years, originally being founded in 1917, where it began in its most populous country, Canada. With the onset of World War I and World War II, it took a few decades, but now the NHL kind of folds into our current understanding of the league, with teams hailing both from the U.S. and Canada in 1942. It took a few more decades, but the NHL then first demonstrated its first expansion in 1967 and saw further teams joining the league throughout the 70s. At the same time, the World Hockey Association was building traction as a premier hockey league as well. Eventually, in 1917, the NHL absorbed the World Hockey Association, taking 4 teams with many notable players such as Wayne Gretzky. And then from there, in the 80s, this was arguably what they call the decade of hockey. It was the most successful period in terms of the players, the rules, and kind of the growth of hockey itself. That kind of leads into when Bettman joins. He joins the league as the first commissioner in 1992, and currently at that time when he joined, the league was comprised of 24 teams. As I'll get into it more too, the league now consists of 32 teams, so he saw 8 teams join in his 30-year reign thus far. But when he joined it in 1992, the NHL was kind of at a teetering point. They were looking to expand into smaller, non-traditional markets, but many of these teams also at the same time were having financial trouble. Hockey was still very much popular, and they wanted to capitalize on their image and grow, but the league really lacked leadership to market, expand, and gain the notoriety similar to other professional leagues like the NBA and NFL. Bettman was seen as the perfect style for the role, and eventually you'll see that this will kind of transform the league itself.
As previously mentioned, the NHL reached a breaking point in the mid-90s. Hockey was viewed as an interesting sport, but it lacked the leadership to market, expand, and gain the notoriety similar to other professional leagues. Thus, the NHL sought out for a businessman, such as Bettman, with an assertive style to push the NHL past the hump. I left this quote up here because this is what he was really tasked with during his time within the NHL. So the quote reads, "Put a stop to labor unrest, sell the product in television mainstream marketplace, change the violent image of the game, curb salary inflation, force enlightened self-interest of reluctant, old-fashioned owners, expand contracts with European developmental leagues and markets, settle the divisive issue of possible Olympic involvement, and help launch several new expansion teams." And as you'll see, his actions demonstrate most of this statement as well.
I would argue that actions speak louder than words. Therefore, we look at the actions that Bettman took to demonstrate transformational and strategic leadership. In validating league growth and expansion, he methodically grew the number of teams of 24 upon his arrival to now 32 as of 2024. Even though this statement is nearly 30 years removed, Bettman expressed his clear vision for the future of the NHL by expanding and relocating into non-traditional U.S. hockey markets. The quote here on the slide shows Bettman's thoughts on expansion with, It was important to continually grow the game and have healthy, stable franchises. One of the reasons that expansion in the 90s was so important to us was because we didn't truly have a national footprint. In 1990, we were in 11 U.S. markets, and now we have more than 20. Non-traditional markets include Arizona, California, Georgia, Florida, Washington, Texas, and a few more. All illustrate the notion that his long-term commitment to league growth was shown in his transformational and strategic mindset. Another major contribution was his actions to develop the game was placed by emphasizing exclusive television rights to increase accessibility across the U.S. Initially, he secured a 5-year deal with Fox upon his arrival, but that has slowly transitioned to incorporate many other current networks and streaming services. Initially, he laid the groundwork for television and broadcasting rights, where those actions now have transformed into an exclusive deal with ESPN that dates from 2021 to 2028, and I'm sure there will be more after as well. Also, this deal is supposedly worth $400 million annually, so that's great to get back to the teams, fans, build on that experience and growth as well. Lastly, he demonstrated effective transformational and strategic leadership with other creative growth initiatives. One that I want to talk about it was with Bettman and the NHL when they announced its first outdoor game titled the Heritage Classic. As a sport played on ice, it was a great opportunity to grow the game with the usage of cold weather. It's ice hockey, so majority of the teams and people growing up fondly are in cold weather states or the country. Also, childhood-like memories on playing on a pond, kind of grow on that. Playing in another sports arena, usually baseball or football, kind of ties those connections with other fans and other sports as well. The first one was played in 2003. They boasted an attendance of 57,000 fans and saw tremendous television success. Kind of over time, since 2003, so almost 20 years now, this culminated to creating the Winter Classic, also to Stadium Series, into non-traditional markets. I was actually a part of the one in Anaheim, I believe in 2014, that saw the Kings and the Ducks, and then also the Global Series too. So they expanded internationally to play games in Sweden, Norway, and some other countries in Europe as well. While all unique in offering, the initiative of creating an outdoor spectacle has allowed the game to reach new heights domestically and internationally. This innovation highlights to the leadership inspired and expressed by Bettman. While we kind of touched on transformational and strategic leadership, I'd also want to talk about his authoritative characteristics as well. Overall, kind of with some of his actions and quotes that we kind of talked about, I would say he's kind of rigid and business-minded in his approach with not much respect to thoughts from fans and players. He still keeps that in mind, and he still tries to keep them involved. But really, being commissioner, he's kind of at the top of the pyramid in terms of decision-making. So I think that gives him more of an authoritative characteristic. In terms of action, Bettman is responsible for 3 separate lockouts, including the 94-95, 04-05, and 2012 and 13. So all of those are basically 15 years apart. Some of those actually resulted, all of them resulted in more than half the season being condensed. And I think one of them, I think the 04-05 actually had the entire season canceled too. So that kind of illustrates his authoritative mindset and being strict on his stance. All of these were kind of unique in circumstances, but really he was, creating transformational leadership with his actions by trying to increase salary cap, free agency rules, other rules, some that I won't really get into because they're, hockey specific, and then ultimately collective bargaining agreements. So on that side, also playing in the Winter Olympics, everyone knows that the Olympics run every 4 years, but the Winter Olympics, they run during the height and midst of the regular season. Really, this one's difficult to kind of get into, but he's pretty firm on not allowing the players to play. Fans, players, and most teams are cited for advocates of their engagement. Everyone would love to see their favorite player playing for their country and play at the highest level in terms of international play. Yet he demonstrates his rather authoritative characteristics as the main reason behind the non-involvement. I kind of left this quote up here because this kind of hits home in terms of how he demonstrates his authoritative characteristics. The NHL has sent teams to Sweden and China for games in an effort to expand and promote the league. Many think the Olympics would provide the same benefit. The NHL was reportedly interested in attending the 2022 Olympics in Beijing when they were negotiating with the IOC, but Bettman made it sound like that door was closed. Overall, it's pretty tough to summarize and analyze all aspects of Gary Bettman's career. It spans multiple decades and multiple different timeframes in terms of league development and kind of initiatives set in place. So it's really hard to kind of culminate it into an overall perspective. And I think that's why using events and major changes in the hockey industry is kind of a great way to exemplify some of his transformational and strategic leadership qualities. Nevertheless, using specific actions or major events in his career can illustrate the combination of transformational and strategic leadership in combination to authoritative characteristics. I think his leadership style has been monumental in expanding the growth in non-traditional markets, garnering better television deals, and then also seeing that growth internationally and domestically. And he's done a lot more for the NHL too. Arguably, you can kind of go back on some of his events and kind of retrospectively look at them and analyze them. But overall, he's allowed the league to grow financially, grow more fans, grow the sport, grow it in the youth. But like I said, it's not been without controversy. As being responsible for 3 separate lockouts, Olympics, and a few other more things kind of demonstrate his authoritative style. On the left here, under that picture of his, this is a quote when he's asked about getting booed at when he unveils the Stanley Cup at the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I think it's pretty fitting for kind of his style. You're always going to have critics. What I've always told people, if I take the ice and it's completely silent, then I know I'm in trouble. And I think that's a great quote to kind of emphasize that he doesn't really care what other people thinks. He's there to transform and build the league, but at the same time, he's really strict and authoritative on his stance. Thank you for watching my presentation.